coffee. So the final speaker before the coffee break is Victor Sannier. We keep with fonts, but we go back to Latin fonts, and in this case, literally Latin fonts, because we go back in time to ancient times where fonts were scratched into walls, and so he will give a talk about this topic. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. I am very pleased to be here to give this talk to you. And that's why I first want to acknowledge the French Gutenberg Association for funding my participation here. It is a French-speaking user group for TER and TER-related tools. So they teach and promote the usage of TER in French and French-speaking countries in general. I can try. Other side. Okay. Okay, is it better? Okay, great. So I was just saying that the French-speaking user group funded my trip here, and I acknowledge them. If you want to know more about the user group, please take a look at the website. Okay, so first of all, what are rustic capitals? They are a script of the Latin alphabet that was used in the first centuries of our era, and the earliest examples we have date from the 1st century. So for example, in election posters and in Pompeii, or in inscription on walls. During the 4th and 5th century, the script got regularized, and we will use a manuscript from this time period as a reference for the rest of the book. And it faded away with time, so that in the 9th and 10th century it was only used for decoration, titles, and so on. Like now they would use sans serif bold typeface, they used rustic capitals. So the source we're going to use is the Vergilius Poeticanus Codex, which has fragments from Virgil's poetic works, and especially the Aeneid. So it might appear that it is quite difficult to read, but the Vatican actually provides high resolution scans, so we can scale up the scans and have everything we need to work with the font. Okay. So next, I will define the scope of the project. So about type revivals, Oloka and Patane published a book last year called Type Revivals, and in chapter 1 they define a spectrum of revivals from perfect recreation, when everything is reproduced, imperfection for imperfection, if there is a hole in the tiles I will reproduce it, and at the other extreme there is recreation, when you take a lot of freedom, you can change the shapes if you want to, add spacing and so on. So on this spectrum, I want to stay about here. That is, I'm going to regularize a bit the manuscript, because I don't want to do 20 times the letter A for all the variants that appear, and I want all the baseline to agree, all the heights to be similar, and so on. So there is a bit of regularization, but I won't do perfect canning and optical compensation and so on, at least for now. So this is quite a middle ground here. Okay, so we can start writing some Metafont code. The first thing I did was to take measurements of various features of the font, so heights, angles, and so on. It appeared to me that the most natural thing to do, given the measurements, was to divide the vertical space into 12 units, with 11 above the baseline for capitals, height. So you have some letters I9 unit and others I11 units. So letters L and F are a bit higher than the other ones. You also have 1 unit below the baseline for the tail of letter Q, for example. You'll see that in the examples. And finally, there is a crossbar height where the 2 lobes of letter B join, where the crossbar of the letter E sits, for example. And so that's not exactly in the middle. That would be 4.5 units, but a little above that. And it's consistent with regular practices in type design, not to be perfectly centered, but a little higher. Okay, so next I design a few letters. I don't need extra macro, there is no repeating part in them. So all I need is a pen. So the pen in Metafont is defined by the thickness of the thickest and thinnest strokes you can draw. So the thickest stroke is about a little more than 1 unit, and the thinnest one is about 1/3 of a unit. Then there is an angle. Rustic capitals are well known to be drawn with a pen about 30-40 angles. And I just put 65, which is a complement to 90, because the way Metafont works. And I can pick up the pen and define as a rustic pen to be this one. And I'm going to use it for all the remaining characters. You can see maybe that letters are a bit pixelated at the moment. It's because it's actually a 10-point font that's being scaled up, but it will be fixed in the paper, so we'll have higher resolution examples. Okay, so then there are a few macros used so that everything is modular and everything is homogeneous and consistent. So for example, there is a draw serif macro. It is used in a draw I macro for letters I and L. The latter is used in a draw P macro, and the draw P macro is used in letter R, for example, because an R is just a P with an extra leg, at least in this typeface. So one of the simplest macro is draw serif. It takes 3 arguments. The first 2 are the 2 ends between which you want to draw the serif, and then its width. So the first equation, it's a constraint to be satisfied. Unlike instant dot, for example, that was presented earlier, I don't assign coordinates to points. I write equations that are to be satisfied, and I write only linear equations, and everything is detailed in the Metafont book. So what it says is that the distance between the 2 points should be width, and the special instruction RT and LFT just take into account the size of the pen nib. So you have to add or remove half of the size of the pen nib in order to be exactly what you specify for the book. The next line says that the 2 y coordinates should be equal. So here we have an example of what I was talking about when I talked about standardization and regularization. I want them to be exactly at the same y coordinate. There is no noise or random adjustment to make. And finally, I can draw just a line between the 2 with a given initial and final angle to have this sort of wave effect. You can see at the top of letter T or at the bottom of letter E, for example. This is used in numerous places. I will give another macro just as an example, which is diagonal stroke 1. You find it the letter A, N, and also letter M, for example. It is a little more involved because you have little spurs at both extremities of the diagonal stroke. So you have to create new points here, ZIL and ZJR, that are a little bit apart from the main strokes, given some width and direction I defined in the main parameter file. And then just say that the 2 points should be at whatever distance times some vector with direction A. Whatever is actually a special keyword in Metafont when you don't want to specify a value, but just say a proportional relation, you use whatever. And finally, there is something to notice in the drawing part. You do not just join all the points, otherwise you will have something like a letter S with a very extreme curvature to pass through all points. So with tension instruction, the main stroke is actually a bit straight, a bit more straight. Okay, so then there are a few ligatures, or as are canning, but in Metafont, you are kerning via a league table. So between letter A and T, for example, because at the top of letter A you have nothing, and same at the bottom of letter T. So if you just put the two boxes right to each other, you will have too much of a gap. So you say you have -1 unit of horizontal space between them. And same for a few other letters. I'm not completely done with all the possible pairs I want to adjust, but you got a few examples here. Okay, so now what I will do is compare my work with two existing typefaces for rustic capitals. The first one is by Wilson, using Metafont also. It was designed in 2000, I think, so it was a long time ago, so long I wasn't even born. And the second one is Landers, not using Metafont as far as I know, but usual vector graphics tool. And so in all examples, the third one will be mine. Okay, so at the top you've got a fragment of the manuscript I was referring to, so locus inque. And in Wilson's typeface, you can see that you have varying boldness across the font. So the top of the letter are usually thinner than the bottom. And I suspect the motivation for doing so is because this is what you obtain when you rotate your pen while drawing, and you increase the rotation while you go down. So you get this kind of effect. I think it is what he was trying to reproduce. And in the second typeface of Landers, we can see that some letters like O, C, S, and letter R and D are a bit higher than normal capital rustic capitals. This might be because we don't use the same reference, or just maybe he had a different goal for this, but I prefer to keep it authentic. And last thing about Landers in this slide is that letter C, S, and O point a bit to the right, while letter U point a bit to the left. So in my opinion, it is a bit sloppy, but maybe it was the intention, because it's an unwritten style, so it can excuse a lot of things. Okay. So next example is lacrymasque entities, still from the Aeneid, and here you can see a few differences. First of all, the upper lobe of letter R should be very small, at least in this time period, so I try to reproduce this. It's not ideal in terms of purely typographic criterion, because it appears a bit bolder than the other letters, especially at a distance. But I want it to be authentic here. And so that's also the reason why there is no spur. I'm not fully satisfied with letter C yet. It should be a bit more curvy at the top, but I expect to change this in the following weeks, and for the final version that will be uploaded to CTAN, it will be corrected, hopefully. And so that's about it. Yeah, for the middle bar of letter E, I chose not to use the serif macro, because according to the manuscript, it should be almost straight and shorter. So it's just a regular stroke and not a serif with a wave-like behavior. Okay, so last example is De Genus Ducis from the same manuscript. And here there are a few things to notice. So first of all, I made so that all letters have the same baseline. Once again, letter G also have a different style in several of our typefaces. That's because there are actually just two variants we can find in original text. So I plan to design a variant as lowercase j, because I don't use lowercase letters currently. I only use uppercase one. So I have 26 free characters to experiment with variants. Okay, and I try to have letters are a bit cleaner. For example, the J in letter in the typeface by Wilson, I think the line is a bit broken going inside. So I try to be a bit smoother and to add at the crossbar height, so at the same height of, for example, the bar of letter E here, that you can see. Okay, so here is a full example of how a text can be rendered with this typeface. So that's the beginning of the Aeneid, the epic poem I was talking about. And you can see, I heard what I was talking about, like the letter R. It appears a bit too bold, in my opinion, so I might include a variant with a slightly bigger lobe. Even if it's not accurate, I think it will provide more satisfactory results, at least for the eye. And also you may notice a few kerning issues, and I will talk a bit about those in the conclusion, but I'm not sure I want to correct them. Okay, so what I plan to do in the near future is to experiment a bit more with a few characters, especially the letter C and U. U was, I can maybe show it back, actually one of the most difficult letters to design, and it is a bit surprising because usually it's letter S, and for this typeface, S was pretty straightforward, just giving the coordinates of a few point equations and doing it, and it was done. But for letter U, since you have an asymmetric shape with a little tail at the bottom, it is very hard, at least to me, to have a satisfactory result. So I think now it looks just fine. Okay, so next I will consider your suggestions, if you have any during the question time, or maybe after during the coffee break or whatnot. And the plan is to submit the typeface as a CTAN package for everyone to use. So as it is created using Metafont, you can use with plain, later, and everything you want. And it will be obviously completely free. You can modify it, sell it, do whatever you want. So two other things I'm not sure I will attempt to do. The first one is to design new characters, because the Latin alphabet of antiquity is more limited than ours. We don't have two different letters for U and V or for I and J, and there is no letter W, for example. So those are not yet designed because I have no reference example, but I might get inspiration for letter M, for example, for the W. And maybe also digits. It could be nice. I don't plan to use this font in a context where you have numbers written in the Arabic numerals, but if someone wants to do that, I can provide them. And I am a bit hesitant about the last point. Should I add some optical compensation, some overshoot and undershoot, and more sensible kernings, or should I keep the authenticity of unwritten font? I think I've already gotten quite far in the process when you compare to the manuscript. It is a bit more regular with uniform thickness and aligned baseline and top line and so on, even if there is no overshoot. So you can see that, for example, letter N looks like it's a bit lower than letter U and stuff like that. So I'm not sure about this one. And finally, one thing I will remember to you is that this is a Metafont, so you can change all parameters if you want to, and just add new fonts for free. So one example I did was changing a few parameters only, just in 4 lines of code. I have a new font. So there is no serif angle. Serifs are actually completely flat, no spur width is 0, and the crossbar height is a little bit higher, thickness is uniform. So I think that's it for line of code change, and you have a new modern looking font. But when you use this kind of parameters here, the kerning issues are very visible, like in letter N and K, for example. So if you want to use it in a modern way, maybe kerning should be improved. And so that's it. Thank you for your invitation and for listening to me, and thank you again to the Gutenberg Association for funding my participation here. I hope I can come to the next one too.
Okay, thank you for your talk, and I also thank Gutenberg to send you here. What's good spent money. And
yeah, the question was, I'm not sure if you're digitizing a handwritten thing and there's some variation with the letters, if you really can settle on a standard form, or if they would have like 2 or 3 variants of each letter, so having something like an N which is more smaller or wider, or a U for the beginning of the line and in the middle of the line. So maybe maybe you can switch back to the slide where you had this drawing. Yeah, that's like the first U at the beginning of the line has a different slant than the ones in the middle, and also the S is not always the same regularities. So I wonder if this calls for having like 2 or 3 variants of each letter in different fonts.
Okay, so there are 2 kinds of variants actually. One is in the shape itself, like for letter J was I was talking about, and for this I plan just to have 2 different input methods. If you want to have variants like purely done to randomness and for no particular reason, just different shape because of the copyist writing a lot of text, then what we can do is introduce ligatures. For example, SU is going to be typed differently than SA, for example. I don't plan to do that because I'm pretty happy with the shapes I got finally, which are kind of a middle ground of all examples I saw. And I also take inspiration from later, more carefully drawn shapes. So as I mentioned in the beginning, in the 9th and 10th century, it was used for decoration. So with different tools and much more time to draw them, and it was a bit more regular. So when I was not sure about a particular shape, I could take a look at.
I've got another thing. There was about 10 years ago, the Historical Museum of Basel undertook the attempt to republish the handwriting of Erasmus from Rotterdam as a form. Maybe you have seen it. It was published in 2016, and the file is no longer publicly available, but I can send it to you. And they had the same questions: how to deal with different running letters in the handwriting, and how the designer solved the problem was, hey, it works. You can use the letters and write new letters with it. So Erasmus 2016 is the name of this form, and I would think it would be fun to have new letters like an @ for an address or paragraph signs or whatever, but maybe under a different name, because there might be people who really like to use the original.
Okay, so 2 things. First, about this particular font, I'm not aware of, but I've done other projects, for example, for Da Vinci's handwriting. I think the question is one I've stated at the beginning, was a spectrum of possibilities. So if someone wants to have more variations, a more organic look, then yes, absolutely, it's possible with Metafont, and it just a choice to be here. I wanted something a bit more regular and a bit modern. And about more characters like @ sign or, I don't know, digits from the 12th century, and before that we used Roman numerals. So for such modern things, I'm not sure it's necessary to have a different name, because you can just ignore them. So, for example, saying I will draw a letter U and V's are a bit different in the near future, and you just have to type uppercase V always, all the time, if you don't want to see letter U. And actually, that's what's being done in the Latin-speaking community and Latin writing communities. on even books published today and so on. If they don't want to use letter U, they just use capital V everywhere. So you can do the same in the source code and just ignore everything else. I'm not sure it's necessary to have a different name.
Okay, are there any more questions? If not, thank you very much again for your talk. So.